Today, the United States is a world power, a country that holds significant influence over large parts of the world. This influence comes in many forms: economic, political, military might, as well as cultural influences across the span of the planet. And because of this influence, many have called the United States a superpower, a country with a dominant position over most other countries, unparalleled. The United States is recognized as a world power and a superpower for many reasons. For one, the United States has the best equipped, best funded military in the world. Unlike other countries, the U.S. can project its military power across the world through its large Air Force, Navy, and Army. The U.S. spends more money on its military. Economically, also, the United States has the greatest GDP, and the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. And American culture is consumed worldwide, and English today is the world's language, the language of commerce, largely due, of course, to the American influence and marketing. Yet, despite this reputation of grandeur, in recent discussions on social media and outside the internet, we see America also becoming synonymous with epic failure in so many categories. And now people are asking, has the United States become a third world country? Well, the answer to that is not explicitly yes or no. But before we get into discussion about the US ranking on the global stage, this is the legal code, and on this channel we discuss various legal topics, whether that relates to your small business, whether that relates to public policies, also celebrity shenanigans. If there's a legal component that I think that you should learn about it, then we discuss it here. So if you like that sort of thing, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course share with anyone else you think will find value in this content. Also, I would like to introduce that I have a medical tourism trip that's approaching in July 2023, as well as October 2023. So if you're unable to come in July, then there is an opportunity for you to join us in October of 2023. And this trip is an opportunity for you if you are underinsured, if you're one of the 40 million Americans that do not have adequate health insurance or dental insurance, then this is a trip to consider. The fee includes your diagnostics, your consultations with the dentist, your consultations with the medical provider, as well as any MRIs, CAT scans, x-rays that you will need, is all included in that flat rate. And all that you'll be responsible for is your airfare, additional appointments with the doctor, as well as any procedures that you'll be receiving. So all of that and a vacation included for what it would cost you to receive a dental implant in the United States. So I really, really want you to think about it and share with anyone else you think also needs this sort of information, that is suffering with the need for a dental implant and just can't afford it, because the dental implant in the United States starts at $4,000. That's not even including the prep work and the post work. It's just including the implant. So it's a really, really economical trip that I wanted to provide for you. I went to these dentists and these doctors, so I have firsthand experience, and I will be guiding you. I'm a familiar face on this trip, so I will be guiding you every step of the way. If you're concerned about, oh, has anyone actually gone under the knife with these doctors or with these dentists, I can attest to it, and that's why I'm opening this up to you, because it's unknown to Americans. Americans have not considered receiving medical care or dental care outside of the United States. It's become more and more popular thanks to the bandwidth of social media, and people are sharing more and more the experience of traveling abroad in order to access wellness and access dental care and health care at a fraction of what it would cost you in the United States. So more and more people are doing this. Medical tourism is a $1 trillion industry, and it's just growing exponentially year after year, especially coming out of the pandemic, where a lot of people lost their health insurance, were unable to see doctors. And so what we're seeing economically on a global scale is like medical tourism rebound 2.0, where there's this rush for people to receive treatments in countries such as Colombia. So if you have any questions regarding this trip, you can email me. My team will get back to you. I'm going to do a follow-up video about FAQs, what to expect as a medical tourist, what you may not have thought about, so I can really provide some insight to you. And I am a real life attorney, so if you're a person that's struggling with your small business, if you have questions regarding estate planning or trademark or copyright, those are my zones of genius. So if you would like to speak to an attorney, you can schedule an appointment with me. The link to scheduling a consultation is also in the description box. Also, one more housekeeping thing is that I have another channel that's called Access Wellness Abroad, and it's a channel dedicated to discussing how other countries are adopting various policies and laws and programs to improve the quality of life for their citizens. And it's something for Americans to look at and compare to see what their country, what America has been doing in terms of improving quality of life, improving productivity, to moving the society forward. Because although we know the United States has the largest GDP, it's suffering in many areas. There's no shortage of despondent Americans, no matter what side of the aisle a person may affiliate with. And so I'm journeying on this channel to look at different policies. How can a society improve itself economically? And we don't see necessarily quality of life factors being tied to economics, but in fact it does relate. So we discussed that over at that channel. Now, without further ado, let's get into this content and whether or not the United States is considered or should be considered a third world country. So is the US a third world country? Well, the term third world arose during the Cold War and was used to define countries that remain non-aligned with either NATO or the Warsaw Pact. The United States, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Western European nations, and their allies represented the first world, while the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam, and their allies represented the second world. So this terminology provided a way to broadly categorize the nations of the world in three different groups, solely based on political divisions, having nothing to do with economics. So strictly speaking, third world was a political nomination rather than an economic grouping. In the vein of that explanation, because many third world countries were also economically poor, this is again during the era of the Cold War, and they were considered non-industrial, it became a stereotype to refer to developing countries. Yet the third world term is often taken to include newly industrialized countries like Brazil, China, India, and now more commonly referred to as BRIC. Also, the third world was not normally seen to include many countries with colonial pasts, such as countries in South America, countries in Africa, and the Polynesian region, as well as Asia. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, the term third world has decreased in use. It has been replaced with terms such as developing countries, industrialized, non-industrialized nations, least developed countries, etc., etc. The concept itself has become outdated, and it no longer represents the current political or economic state of the world. Until now, the recent talk of the third world has emerged as it relates to speaking about and referencing the United States and the crumbling U.S. infrastructure. The United States may regard itself as the leader of the free world, but an index developed recently that was released in July 2022 places the U.S. much further down on the list. In its global rankings, the United Nations Office of Sustainable Development dropped the U.S. to the 41st place worldwide, down from its previous ranking of 32. So under this ranking, an expansive model of 17 categories, many of them focused on environment and equity. The United States ranks between Cuba and Bulgaria in that regard, widely regarded as developing countries because of the economic troubles as well as political uncertainty in these nations. And the US is ranked smack in the middle of them. So let's talk about US politics and the political landscape that we've been seeing play out. The US is also now considered a flawed democracy, according to The Economist magazine, which has a democracy index. Having political instability is another marking of the developing world. The US, once regarded as a stable government and a balance of power, smooth transition from one president and administration to the next. The recent insurrection that happened when Donald Trump left office and Joe Biden came in represented the beginning indicators of political instability. One political historian who studies U.S. institutional development credits these dismal ratings as the inevitable result of two problems that pervade American history: institutional racism, not just racism as an attribute of personal prejudice, but the racism that has been codified as part of the legal system in the U.S., such as Jim Crow laws, redlining, deeds that prohibit sales to blacks. With that framework of laws that make up the foundation of the United States, it connotes a level of political instability. And because of those inequities are built into the legal system, it's now begun to cheat not only blacks, but also Americans, all Americans, out of healthcare, education, economic security, and environment. These lend themselves to being attributes to political instability. There was a time when racism and segregation only heavily impacted blacks, that only blacks were marginalized and prohibited from opportunities and advancement. But we're seeing that this inequity is pouring over and affecting everyone's lives. It's now pervasive and not just a black problem, but an American problem. Everyone is susceptible to this inequity now. Again, in its global rankings, United Nations Office of Sustainable Development that did this ranking, dropping the US to the 41st place worldwide, again, where the US was number 32 and dropped dramatically in just a few years. According to these 17 categories, its ranking systems, they also look at experiences of ordinary people, including the ability to enjoy clean air and water, the creation of wealth, access to healthcare. Those are the markers within this test. So while the size of the American economy is significant in this scale, so too does unequal access to healthcare, unequal access to wealth. Also, those are heavily weighed. When judged by accepted economic principles such as the Gini coefficient, which measures income inequality, the U.S. has risen markedly over the past 30 years. The U.S. has the biggest wealth gap of the G7 nation. Again, the Gini coefficient is to measure a country's income inequity, and income inequality is greater now than it has ever been. These results reflect the disparity in the United States, which are most pronounced for Black Americans, but have persisted well beyond the demise of chattel slavery and the repeal of the Jim Crow laws. So even though it's decades later, the effects of the welfare state tailored to racism is evident in the inadequate health policies driving a shocking decline in the average American expectancy. These failures of America have seemed to be blamed on political parties, but both are to blame. Both have been responsible in creating a patchwork system of social policies that have perpetuated inequity. For example, Democrats from the South cooperated with Republicans to prevent passing universal health care or unionized workforces, although each masquerade as to be on the side of the Americans, rejecting proposals for strong federal intervention. Both have left a broken, disorganized, nonsensical policy of local funding for education and public health. There are other ways to measure a country's level of development, and some of them the U.S. fares better. Good results in average income per person, coming in at $64,000 a year, and the average length of education and schooling is around 13.7 years, squarely ranking the U.S. in the developed world when it comes to that. Yet its ranking suffers, however, when these factors are appraised against the political system. Again, this democracy index now groups the U.S. in a flawed democracy, with an overall score that ranks the U.S. between Estonia and Chile. It falls short of being a top-rated full democracy, in large because of the fractured political culture. And this shows a growing divide is most apparent in the divergent paths between the red and blue states. According to a January 2022 poll, only 55% of Americans believe Mr. Biden legitimately won the 2020 election, despite no evidence of widespread voter fraud. Election denialism carries with it the threat that the election officials in the Republican-controlled jurisdiction will reject or alter vote tallies that do not favor the Republican Party in upcoming elections, further jeopardizing the score of the U.S. on the Democracy Index. Red and blue Americans also differ on access to modern reproductive care for women. This hurts the U.S. gender equity ratings, one aspect of the United Nations Sustainable Development Index. When paired with structural inequities and a fractured social policy, the dwindling Republican commitment to democracy lends weight to the classification of the U.S. as a developing country. So again, we're looking at all of these markers to see where the U.S. ranks. Also, with the decline in the perception about the U.S. and the actual, as we see it with our eyes, the degradation of the country, you may be asking, why isn't the United States doing anything to rehabilitate itself, to improve, to revitalize? Why is the government watching the economy tank and people living on the streets? The dismal failure of the United States on a variety of global surveys. These failures are also palpable because we see it in the United States. We see the crumbling on the world stage. We see the injustice. We see the inequity play out in the daily lives of Americans. Despite it being no secret, what we don't see is any effort to try to change things in a meaningful way. Why isn't anything being fixed? Why isn't the federal government stepping in to overhaul? Well, the reason is wrapped up with the idea of American exceptionalism, a belief in American superiority over the rest of the world. Both political parties have long promoted this belief at home and abroad. The reputation of America is the tendency to proclaim excellence rather than pursue excellence. The peddling of American exceptionalism encourages Americans to maintain a robust sense of national achievement and pride, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. And because Americans think they're exceptional, this distracts them from actually becoming exceptional, from actually creating policies to make the United States exceptional and above board. This ideology allows them, tells them they're already there and there's nothing more they need to do. They could just live off the hog and enjoy life. So while we experience as citizens the lack of investment, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of stability, bumpy roads, garbage along the side of the streets and roads, millions of people throughout the country living in tents, lack of affordable health care, they get to pretend that this isn't happening because America's too exceptional for it to happen to it. So how can a nation be exceptional when this is happening on their front step? Yes, there have been developments in technology. We see Elon Musk going to Mars, having hotels on Mars, people allowed to operate businesses, doing whatever they want to do. Very lenient policies when it comes to regulation of businesses and technology, but that's not trickling down to improve the lives of Americans unless you can afford it, unless you can access better technology. Instead, every facet of the American existence is wrought with struggle, lack of oversight. Everyone is free, but this freedom is not necessarily benefiting Americans, especially if the lifespan is being shortened. So how is it a flex when Americans aren't even living long? That's a testament to troubling times. And if you dare speak about the Brooklyn system, you're blamed and told that it's, oh, because you don't know how to bootstrap your way to prosperity. Well, that's just the most ridiculous statement that was ever uttered, because you can't even physically have you ever tried to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, actually do it? It's impossible. You'll fall down, which is perhaps the idea all along. At the same time, as threats to democracy become more and more serious, a devotion to American exceptionalism keeps the country from having a candid appraisal and for them instituting any sort of course correction. Right now, America is like the popular teenager in high school who's popular, well-loved, beautiful, desirable. Everyone wanted to be him or her, associated with him or her. Now fast forward 20, 30 years, that teenager is now an adult, hanging on the coattails of 20 years ago, but hasn't done anything to develop him or herself, whereas everyone else has been growing, developing, maturing, buying homes. America is still hanging on to the coattails of yesteryear. And so that exceptionalism that is unique to America has prevented America from coming into 2023 and saying, what do we need to revitalize the nation? They're still carrying their legacy, but having done nothing to improve the quality of life for its people. So let me know your thoughts. Have you been witnessing the decline of the United States in your local town or in your state? Do you think United States should be ranked as a third world nation? Considering these factors separate from the GDP, considering access to healthcare, access to wealth, in regards to the wealth gap that is growing each and every year. Let me know in the comment section what you think, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.